Podemos empezar de nuevo. Como hemos comentado, esta segunda parte la vamos a dedicar a ver los fondos que hay de presupuestos comunitarios para clústeres. Entonces, tenemos con nosotros, finalmente la huelga de controladores no le ha impedido llegar. Tenéis a vuestra disposición, porque él va a hacer la presentación en inglés, ¿cómo se llama? Auriculares para la traducción simultánea. Entonces, tenemos con nosotros a Carsten Schierenbeck, Policy Officer de la Comisión Europea y responsable de los programas para clústeres, que nos va a hablar de estos programas. También Luis Guerra, de CDT, creo que algunos de vosotros o muchos de vosotros ya lo conocéis, que nos va a hablar de Horizonte 2020 y no está incluido en el programa, pero también Laura Miñambres de este ministerio, que hará una breve presentación de los fondos para clústeres dentro del programa COSME, cuyos representantes somos nosotros. Entonces, bueno, pues sin más introducción. Sí, pero intervienes tú primero. Le paso la palabra a Luis Guerra, de CDT.
Sí.
Sí.
Es un momento. Bueno, buenos días a todos y gracias por venir, como ha comentado María, y aprovechando que estáis aquí para toda la información relativa a las ayudas nacionales que tenéis aquí de este ministerio, pues hemos querido aprovechar y contaros una convocatoria o varias convocatorias que van a salir a nivel europeo de clústeres, que creemos que es de vuestro interés, que es un poco novedad, si queréis verlo así, dentro de Horizonte 2020, y que en la parte de Horizonte 2020, innovación en las pymes, que es un poco la que yo soy responsable desde CDT, pues tiene un presupuesto bastante considerable. Estamos hablando de casi 30 millones de convocatoria, que no es poco para este tipo de cosas. Y hemos traído pues a Carsten, que es la persona que lo lleva de Enterprise, para que nos ilustre, para que nos dé toda la información de esta convocatoria. No es algo inminente, es para 2015, pero bueno, por ir preparando el camino y para que conozcáis el detalle de esas convocatorias. Y luego, bueno, pues aprovechando también, os contaré un poquito todo lo que se está haciendo desde Horizonte 2020, COSME, un poco quizás una overview general de lo que se trata en esta innovación en las pymes en relación a clúster específicamente, y al final Laura os contará los detalles de las dos convocatorias que también tiene COSME para clústeres, con lo cual al final pues resulta que hay 3 convocatorias con dinero europeo donde podéis ser beneficiarios directos, ¿no? Para parte de las cosas que podéis hacer a partir del dinero o las ayudas que tengáis aquí a nivel nacional y en esa labor que tenéis de internacionalizar vuestras empresas y vuestros sectores. Así que yo no digo más por ahora y paso la palabra directamente a Carsten para que nos cuente la convocatoria INNOSUP 1. Y Carsten, all yours.
First of all, thank you for the Ministry for the Industry, Energy, Tourism, as well as the Ministry for the Competitiveness and Economy for inviting me and to give the chance to outline a little bit what the initiatives and programs are at the European level. I also started with an apology to the colleague that will cover the COSME ones, because I thought I also cover shortly some of the COSME parts, but the key part of my presentation will be about the Horizon 2020 initiative, which has a complex name, Cluster Facilitated Projects for New Industrial Value Chains, but who masters complexity normally gets rewarded. And indeed, we have 24.9 million there, and we hope actually over the whole Horizon 2020 period to have perhaps a budget of 140 million for this initiative, which is actually quite considerable and we're quite happy about. But let's see what you think later when you pose your questions to me. First of all, I think clusters is a very important and a timely subject. I mean, clusters, first of all, they contribute to the competitiveness, jobs and growth, and they're timely because in these days with the high unemployment rates, I think they are very much need to be better used. This is also increasingly recognized at the European level. I mean, there was a long time since we had, let's say, our last communication on clusters towards world-class clusters in Europe in 2008. But I think the discussion also linked to smart specialization, the recent efforts of the Vanguard Initiative, etc., have put the topic of clusters, again, I think, quite high on the political agenda. And I think this is good. And if one looks at the recent industrial policy communication towards the European Industrial Renaissance that was published in January, I mean, that shows it calls for SMEs to be better integrated into global value chains. It calls for a better combination of regional and industrial policies, the linkage to smart specialization strategies, and it calls for better exploiting the potentials that cluster offers as favorable ecosystems. And in particular, made reference to the cluster facilitated projects that I will talk about later. But it's also recognized in our DG, where our Director General, Daniel Calleja, has a keen interest on clusters. And we're currently are in the process of launching also a public consultation on the revision of the Small Business Act. And in that, we also, let's say, announced that we're considering to put forward a new European cluster strategy for growth in 2015, and on which we will seek the input of stakeholders. And we will discuss ideas and are seeking for input and ideas also at the European cluster conference that we're holding in Brussels on the 20th and 21st of October later this year. And there's also an opportunity to discuss with stakeholders also at the European Emerging Industries Conference later in November under the Italian presidency to discuss the orientations. So in a way, I think we're in a transition phase, and I think the initiatives that I will talk about will already outline a little bit the concepts, the ideas behind, because I think one key aspect is that the cluster concept has also changed. It's not anymore just about the narrow sectoral approach, it's also much more about cross-sectoral linkage and emerging industries, and that's at the center of it. Now, let me then first start giving you just a snapshot of what we have done in the recent years. We have launched a European Cluster Excellence Initiative in the past that's tried to help for the professionalization of the cluster management in the SME intermediaries and cluster organizations. And under this, let's say, the initiatives linked to it, we have so far launched benchmarking and trainings that led to also 525 cluster organizations to receive a bronze label and 36 to receive a gold label, where we have instructed 50 instructors in order to be able to train further and cluster managers under a number of projects. We've also set up the European Cluster Collaboration Platform in order to facilitate the collaboration amongst clusters in Europe. And as part of the efforts and the projects linked to this, 7 memoranda of understanding was signed, 6 projects were supported, and efforts were also widely linked also to the Mediterranean countries. And at the moment, there are 920 cluster organizations that have registered under this European Cluster Collaboration Platform. But that is not always picked up by all industries. For instance, when you look at the creative industries, their participation is not so high. So I think not all of the fields are fully covered, and not all of the collaboration and the international collaboration is yet, I think, fully there, and I think more needs to be done. But also the European Cluster Observatory has provided quite a lot of analysis in the recent year. They have mapped in 2006 for the first time actually competences across Europe. But also recently a lot of more work has been done at looking at the cross-sectoral linkages. So where are actually these emerging industries evolving? And if we want more evidence-based policy, I think that analysis is much more needed. And it was very interesting that the findings that the extension work of the Alliance by PricewaterhouseCoopers did, because they looked, for instance, at what are the early indicators of these emerging industries. They looked at financial investments and mergers and acquisition as early indicators of the blurring of the boundaries of different sectors. And they identified 7 emerging industries, for instance. And there's a lot of information available, and more will be made under the new phase of the European Cluster Observatory that has started this year, and that will now run for 3 years. So there's much more information coming, and I'll capture upon this a little bit more. Now under COSME, we will basically have a cluster excellence program, a cluster internationalization program for SMEs, in particular that is going outward also to third countries beyond the EU. and we will continue the activities under the European Cluster Observatory. Now, the European Cluster Excellence Program that will support benchmarking activities to further increase the number of bronze and gold labels in EU countries and to support training activity at large scale. We intend to have a call published in July there with 1.25 million euros, and it's planned to have the call there about every 2 years. Then, in addition, we have the European Cluster Internationalization Program for SMEs, which is very much trying to reinforce and strengthen the concept of the European Strategic Cluster Partnership. I think this is a particular field, I think, where more needs to be done. If you look at all the smart specialization strategies that have been put out in region, I think then it's also to look with whom do we want to collaborate, in which areas it makes sense in order to build synergies, and also to join forces together in order to go, for instance, international. I think if you go to China, etc., and you have your bilateral meetings, of course this is always working, especially if you build up trust with particular partners for a long time. I think sometimes you may achieve more when actually you present it as a European strategic partnership, coming with different regions out of Europe, coming with different SMEs, offering complementary packages or competing ones. And I think quite often the, let's say, experience that we have is, in addition, it's not only about going international, but at the same time, you foster the collaboration between the different cluster partners. And I think this is is key to do there. Now, we had planned to publish a call also in July, but we will publish it now in November with a higher budget, actually, because we will combine the 2014-2015 budget. So we will have there a budget of 3.75 million, where there will be a Cluster Go International program that will, on the one side, offer an opportunity for new European strategic cluster partnerships be formed and support their activities also for basically supporting preparatory actions for these partnerships, to develop joint strategies, to identify common partners abroad, to look into joint marketing and branding activities, etc. But equally, there's also an opportunity to strengthen already existing European strategic partnerships. Those that have been already put on the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, the 13 or others, in order to go further, to look at what can be done. Can joint matchmaking events be done? Can perhaps joint offices abroad be organized? You name it. So in a way, this is an opportunity for all clusters that want to team up with others to go further. Now, the European Cluster Observatory in its new phase will also offer a lot. It will first update the cluster mapping that is available there. It captures also much more the cross-sectoral trends, internationalization trends. It will provide foresight analysis. So it will provide all the analysis and statistical information to allow for evidence-based policies. But in addition, it will make a move much further into also the policy domain. Because on the one side, it will provide what are the favorable regional framework conditions for clusters, and it will provide a regional ecosystem scoreboard, and it will offer a stress test for cluster policies. And at the same time, it will showcase also how modern cluster policy to support the development of emerging industries and cross-sectoral linkages can be done. In that respect, we had published a call for the expression of interest for model demonstrator regions, where we received quite a lot of interest. 44 applications were received, despite not having offered actually a single cent or a single euro. And that also shows that there is, I think, quite a lot of interest in working in this field on emerging industries. Now, the selected 6 model demonstrator regions, they will receive advice from the experts of the European Cluster Observatory. They will get a summary assessment of the situation. They'll get a peer review organized, a regional survey undertaken in the region, and then a policy briefing of what could be done in the region to further advance the agenda in this field. And I think this will also offer a lot of regions in Europe further guidance of what can be done, what initiative can be launched, what instrument can be put in place, which will be very relevant for the initiative under Horizon 20 that I will talk about. But obviously, as this is now taking place now and the regions will get the advice in 2015, that will not yet be available for the first phase of the Horizon 2020 initiatives, but it will be available there for in the next years for applicants as guidance material. Next, please. Now, coming to the, let's say, the core topic of our presentation here. Next one, please. The first question is why we have put this initiative under Horizon 2020 and why we're bothering about it anyway. I mean, what was interesting when we published the 2008 staff working document on clusters, which showed also the results of the InnoBarometer, is basically that SMEs in clusters are more innovative than SMEs outside clusters. And I think that is something that we always have to repeat actually to the policymakers. And also recent results from the European Cluster Excellence Scoreboard also confirm that actually the SMEs that are organized and part of the clusters, they grow more. So there is also a clear argument for why we should make better use out of clusters. I think one aspect where, in a way, the cluster companies did not so well was actually on carrying out research in your own laboratories. But that's also very much an indication that they collaborate with others, that they outsource this more, and that so in that way, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Secondly, why do we focus on new industrial value chains? So when we talk about value chains, we may have heard all about Porter's model from inbound logistics, etc., the traditional linear one. But here it's a bit about the new industrial value chains and the combination that they are. And if one looks, for instance, at some, there's a nice atlas of economic complexity by Hausmann, who showed actually that it's particular those countries that master, let's say, complex technologies, complex industries that are very much at the high end of the economic development. It shows a bit, it's in particular in those industries or technologies that only a few countries master in a way. That is an indication that it is then a very complex technology in this industry, and that basically pays off. So the idea is there that we need to bring the competences together from different sectors to address particular challenges and opportunities and to develop solutions to boost economic growth. And I think the days are over where the whole part of the value chain was based in one company, in one region, and perhaps even in a whole sector. And that's why we argue that we need to evolve to a cross-sectoral collaboration that may give rise to emerging industries, because emerging industries should also not be understood just as basically the new radical technology that leads to a new sector, but it's also quite often about the existing sectors that are being transformed, evolved into emerging industries. And it's about basically bringing innovation or one part of the value chain into another and combining this. So it's not always about the radical innovation, so to speak, but it's about bringing innovation that exists already in one sector and finding new applications, solution, adaptation into another one. And I think this is a key part there. Next. And that's why we make also the explicit reference to the emerging industries. And that's basically the idea behind the cluster facilitated projects. Next one. And we see a particular role for cluster organizations or other SME intermediaries in this. This call under Horizon 20 is open to everybody. I will talk later about it. The standard eligibility criteria are 3 legal entities from 3 different member states. But nevertheless, the call still says that cluster organizations and other SMEs are invited to facilitate the collaboration, because one key objective of this initiative is to reach out to many SMEs and to involve many SMEs. And I think there the intermediaries, the cluster organizations that represent the groups of SMEs are well suited for it. Because they provide or channel innovation and business support to SMEs. They also act as cross-regional bridge builders through other regions. And they act as catalysts, or can act as catalysts, for cross-sectoral collaboration. And in order to coordinate and promote basically also value chain innovation. This is what I explained before. It's about bringing innovation from one part of the value chain or one part of the sector into another one. And this needs to be done via a systemic approach, a coordinated approach, which, let's say from our thinking, also goes very much back to the ideas of the so-called large-scale demonstrator approach that the expert panel on service innovation in the EU has presented a while ago. And the idea behind is a bit, in a way, the reversal of the traditional innovation approach. Initially, we always looked at supporting research, supporting innovation, and then looked at how we can commercialize the ideas that came out of. And I think now it's time to turn this around and first start with the challenge, the problems, the opportunities, and then look at how we can create the entrepreneurial opportunity solution in order to address them. And that's a bit the idea behind it there. And what does it mean? It means that we need to basically not test individual technological concepts in isolation, but to basically test a range of solutions, a range of possibilities to address a particular challenge, and to test them in a real-life operative environment that is basically near market. And this is the move away from the traditional prototype projects, the individual one in isolation, to basically supporting different efforts of SMEs to come up with a solution and then to test them in order to have viable options and opportunities to have this roll out. And that basically implies following very much a user-driven, inclusive approach to bring together also other innovation actors in order to achieve this. And quite often in the past, we also very much advocated that actually the owner of the challenge, sometimes public authorities, should be also on board, because they are the ones that can basically make the implementation happening. But okay, here it's much more about reaching out to SMEs, but it's still about creating entrepreneurial opportunities for SMEs and to address societal challenges and to provide solutions for it. Now, we will launch the call basically in 2015. The deadline for proposals is the 30th of April 2015. But in a way, the text of the work program is already available, so you can already look what you need to do. This is an innovation actions, and I think this is very important. And the innovation actions always basically demand that the majority of the activities need to be focused on the demonstration, the prototype, the testing of the market feasibilities, etc. So basically, this is much closer now to the SMEs, where we basically need to support real projects. That doesn't mean that it cannot involve coordination and support activities, but that cannot be basically the bulk of it. So we call in the work program also very much for supporting also the open space for collaboration to happen, because you need to basically bring different companies together, and that sometimes involves the matchmaking to do it first, and then sometimes support the projects that come out of it. But basically both is basically possible there. What we are looking for there is to have appropriate EU contribution of 2.5 to 5 million euros, and we expect to fund basically between 5 and 10 projects. If you calculate this higher, this means roughly that you have projects of a size of 3.5 million to 7 million approximately. And what is particular here is that we have stated that at least 75% of the budget must go to support innovation in SMEs, either directly by SMEs being a beneficiary or indirectly as third parties, for instance by innovation voucher schemes, etc., mentoring, whatever. But the key thing is that the bulk of the funding needs to support innovation in SMEs. So this is a key aspect. And there is one particular, let's say, criteria to consider. There is a maximum of amount of 60,000 euros that can be passed on to any third party. And if you look at the general annexes of the Horizon 2020 program, you will also find that you must not necessarily identify the SMEs that benefit from it in advance, but you must at least outline the groups of companies that will benefit from it. So you need to you give at least an indication. Now, as I said before, the next slide, please. The standard eligibility criteria apply, so you need 3 legal entities from 3 different member states. But that also means that you can equally involve also large enterprises. I mean, it sometimes depends upon the different emerging industries, new industrial value chain that you want to push forward. You also sometimes need large enterprises as a system integrator, because sometimes they organize the value chains, etc. So they can also be part on, but that doesn't change the rule that you need to provide 75% of the funding for innovation in SMEs. And sometimes you have SMEs that drive new ideas that can be basically part of the approach already from the beginning. But as I said, you can also organize the networking, the matchmaking first, and then support the innovation in SMEs. What needs to be outlined is how you intend to do this. Now, what is different there to many other calls is that you do not first have to submit the whole application, but this will happen basically in a two-stage procedure, where in the first phase, only a 10-page concept note will be requested, where you basically outline the vision for the new industrial value chain, the objectives, the activities that you intend to foresee, the possible partners. And what we particularly also ask there is that applicants outline how they intend to also leverage and link to smart specialization strategies and European structural investment funds. Because having had smart specialization strategies in the regions done, I think we need to make better linkages to this. And yes, we have 24.9 million here under this, but this is still tiny in comparison to the funding that is available in the European structural and investment funds. And I think if we really want to create new industrial value chains and to put the condition in place, this also requires sometimes infrastructure investments, etc., that is not possible to be funded through the Horizon 2020, but that can be funded through the European structural investment funds. So that's why we try to support in particular those that have the support in the regions for the orientations that are foreseen there. Now to conclude, at least on this, the key aspect behind is to support cross-sectoral and cross-regional collaboration to unlock innovation and growth, and to use cluster organizations to support innovation in SMEs and facilitate structure change. So it's not about funding cluster organizations, but it's about using cluster organization in order to make that cross-sectoral collaboration and innovation happen, where we hope new industrial value chains may emerge that give rise to new emerging industries. And we advocate very strongly the new market demonstrator approach to test the solution. And we will provide, maybe still in July, maybe in September, also a background note that is mentioned in the work program to give a bit more information to applicants what we mean by this. And if I may still give a few examples, one further, basically previous initiatives that we launched are not comparable. So you cannot take these one-to-one to Horizon 2020, but it's sometimes still good to mention a little bit what was done. For instance, under the European Mobile and Mobility Industries Alliance, we had 3 large-scale demonstrator projects to support sustainable tourism in rural areas through a better use of mobile services. And there it's also not just about putting in place an app, etc., but then you need to look at the whole band of activities that you need to support. You need to provide a free Wi-Fi zone for tourists to create more opportunities for them. You need to speak to all the hotels. Maybe you need to present guidebooks. You need to look what other activities you can do. So also basically follow there a cluster approach that quite often I think a lot of, let's say, the tourist offices may not undertake as such. I think where more cluster organizations come in. And in a way, this basically looked there at making the linkages between cultural heritage, tourism, and mobile services. And next slide. And I think the interesting impact was there that out of these combinations and different activities, also some activities came out or results that were not initially foreseen. So it created a lot of, let's say, touristic offering sometimes because you had particular then groups of stakeholders that came up that wanted to dress up at Romans and wanted to come to the sites. And basically, this was not initially planned of the project, but sometimes you may have not planned for it, but you get something out through all these activities. And there were a lot of activities, and it was further rolled out also to other regions there, this project. Now, one region in Limburg that was supported by the European Service Innovation Center and also received their advisory support services. I mean, they also try to look at different ways to make the move there from basically a printing towards digital solution, and then they set up special incubation programs, etc., and made the linkages also there to academia, etc. Next slide. And also there, the cross-sectoral collaboration. I mean, looking at perhaps big data, the linkages between health, chemical industries. I mean, that was an approach taken there. And it's always interesting to see what the different approaches were. So if you also want to look at the European Service Innovation Center, you find the experience of the 6 model demonstrators there, how they have approached, let's say, to better unlock the potential of service innovation to promote the further development. Next. And one last example was also that we funded in the past under the Europe Innova initiative is Green Conserve, for instance, that tried to bring together, in a way, the construction sector and the eco industries. And they use also an innovation voucher scheme. Next slide. And a few more clicks, please. There is also an example in Stockholm, Sweden, in a way, where the renewables, water, and waste sectors were in a way looked at to create a circular economy and how to link this to sustainable construction in a way. And next one, and they used, for instance, an innovation voucher schemes. I think this is also something that is increasingly being taken up. You also find a lot of information there. There was a lot of information also in the Riga Declaration, for instance, gave some advice of how to do this. And you have different initiatives. You need to manage the risk, for instance, if you do this. But at the same time, it's a very powerful user friendly tool to be used. And under the European Creative Industries Alliance, we also explored with the use of innovation vouchers, not in the traditional sense, where you basically put an innovation voucher scheme in place to provide innovation management consultancy for the companies in the particular industry, but also to allow to incentivize cross-sectoral linkages. So there are 3 initiatives were launched, for instance, in order to provide support not to companies in the creative industries, because it's a European Creative Industries Alliance, but to companies from other industries in order to access innovative services, design, etc., you name it, from the creative industries. So there, in a way, the direct beneficiaries were not the companies from the creative industries, but there were the service providers and still benefiting from this. And I think that has been quite useful, and some lessons there from some of the projects showed if you combine this also with other instruments, matchmaking, etc., then you also increase the impact. And perhaps some interesting reports will be done when the final policy recommendation of the European Creative Industry Alliance will be presented later in November at the final conference in Amsterdam. Now, just to highlight a little bit what were the, let's say, interest in other fields. I mean, when we had the 2013 call for proposals for clusters and entrepreneurship in support of emerging industries, which is a bit a predecessor, but not really the same because it's now much closer at the SME level. You see there a bit the tech cloud, and it was quite interesting to see what was actually the interest of applicants, and we received quite a huge number of proposals, 124, and it was interesting then to see where was the interest of those that applied. Next slide, please. And okay, it's difficult to see, but if you see on the left side, actually a huge number of proposals actually referred, for instance, to eco industries. I think 82 out of the 124 made reference to eco industries, with creative industries, for instance, also being quite highly mentioned there. But the key thing is also that there were always the cross-reference, and I think it's about finding these linkages between the different industries. I mean, this is just to give an, let's say, a snapshot also where the, let's say, the interest in Europe lies. I hope I've given you a little bit of snapshot of, let's say, what is expected there. I think this is a very challenging call. It's not an easy one. And I think how you want to achieve it, etc., that is up to you, up to the experience that exists in the region to drive this. You may know which tools work, may not work, but what for sure is expected, that I think the cross-sectoral dimension is stressed in the application. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer questions as good as I can. Thank you.
Bueno, pues damos paso a las preguntas. entiendo que las podéis hacer en español o en inglés, lo que prefiráis.
Hello, Carsten. I'm Avendrel from Acció in Catalonia. I would like to confirm the budget for the call on cluster internationalization, because I think you mentioned that it was increased and it would be launched in November instead of that in July. So I want to confirm how much budget we're talking about. And then also for the call on excellence, I would like to know where I can address like some questions, because I was told that there would be like this mailbox, and I couldn't find it because the call is not published yet. So there's no mailbox. And for this new call, I would like to know whether the typical applicant is the cluster organization itself, or whether it's with the support or the leadership of the region. And if it's only directed to cluster organizations and the call follows like the typical EU funding scheme, I think it's a bit challenging, like, because 2.5 million euros for like any Spanish cluster organization, it's impossible to have in advance, and some cash flow problems might arise. So I would like to know if you could explain a bit more how this is going to be implemented. Thank you.
No, sorry, because because the call is not yet published. So as long as it's not published, you can also not ask questions about it. So there will not yet be a functional mailbox there where you can ask questions. As soon as the call is published, you can ask questions for clarification, etc. What I can already, I think, indicate for the Cluster International one, I think it will be 3.75 million. And this will be rather for the Go International one, while the fund, there will also be funding for the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, but this will be implemented through a service contract, so that might not be so much of interest to you.
And for the other questions on the other call, on the one that you just mentioned, okay, you cannot elaborate more?
Okay, can you repeat the question? Okay,
sure,
I presumed it was related to the cluster excellence. So sorry.
No. The other one was related to this last call. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if the typical applicant is going to be the cluster organization itself, or whether it's for the region, for example, to take the leadership, given it's quite a substantial amount of money. So for a Spanish cluster organization, if the call follows like a typical EU funding scheme in which there's a pre-financing, but then you need to have some financing your own in advance. This might be very challenging because we're talking about like 2.5 to 5 million euros. So I was wondering if you could clarify a bit on that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, let's say typical applicants, in a way they're none, because we say any legal entity. However, what is mentioned is that cluster organizations should be involved. But you can equally involve companies, public authorities, you name it. You are free to choose who should be in that. But I think that should also be a strategic choice of the partners, that can address the issues that are there and equally are meant to be there, so to speak. I think there one needs to look carefully of what are the activities that are foreseen or at least expected, and who can basically deliver this. Equally, I think one also needs to look with whom do you want to team up. I mean, I think every cluster organization always has their, let's say, or region have their usual partners, and they have built trust, etc. But that doesn't always mean that it's, let's say, necessarily having the most sense in terms of achieving the cross-sectoral value chain also at a European level. What is sometimes quite interesting, I mean, you can have a look, for instance, at the European Cluster Observatory to see what is there. They have made an analysis of the emerging industries, etc. So you can see a little bit from a statistical point of view where are, let's say, the strongholds elsewhere in Europe. Equally, you can also look at the policy part. You can look at the smart specialization platform set up with a joint research center to look where actually the other policy priorities set in other regions. I think these are a bit complementary. They have their, semi-useful tool, which is the eye at risk, which at least allows you to see on which priorities regions in Europe have basically emphasized on in their smart specialization strategy. That may at least help you to find partners if you do not just want to collaborate with your usual ones.
First of all, congratulations for the presentation and also for the conference. I think it's a very good initiative, so thank you. Gracias por la organización. Carsten, I have a questions. I come from Aclima. Aclima is an environment and clean tech industry cluster, almost 20 years old. For more than 1 year, we are part of one European strategic, a cluster partnership. The clean tech one is the only one that there is in Europe in these terms. And at that moment, only 11 were selected. And I have a problem because from that moment, really we didn't have any clear benefit for our members, companies, or the cluster itself for being a partnership. It's really nice because you can have, you can make networking activities, you can have a very nice level, but I don't know if you could be more precise that from now really is going to be a strategy with budgets and initiatives in order to, to promote this kind of partnerships. Thank you very much.
Okay. First of all, I'm sure that you're eagerly awaiting the cluster internationalization call. That's one aspect. So it has taken a while, but here it is. But I think I agree with your assessment. If we want to push this agenda further, if we want to be serious about European strategic cluster partnership, this needs to receive more attention. But there it's up to you, because how it works, if there's no voices raised to push this further, we may not succeed at our end. We have our arguments, but I think there are also you as the stakeholders, you need to voice your expectation. And I think there is a chance to do this at the European Cluster Conference later in the year in October. And equally, if we get our blessing to continue and maybe propose a new European cluster strategy for growth next year, we will for sure launch a public consultation on this. And there will be your opportunity to say what you want, what you expect, and where are your needs, where Europe can put a helping hand.
Thank you. Mr. Schierenbeck, at the beginning of your conference, you have explained the the cluster excellence medals. Is a recommendation of the European Commission to obtain this medal? This is my first question. The second one is, do you fully endorse this recommendation? Because you have here a large number of clusters, of Spanish clusters. Many of us, we are considering to participate in the proceeding of obtaining these medals. So it's important to know your personal opinion. And the third one is, do you think that the European Commission will use these medals or categories in order to fix a threshold for obtaining funds in specific projects, or is just a general recommendation? Thank you.
Thanks, good question. First of all, is it valuable? And I think everybody who may obtain such a label will ask, what was it in it for me? It will cost something. Is it worth it, etc.? I think that's similar to the question that the SMEs will ask, should I join a cluster organization or not? Should I pay the membership fees? And I think sometimes such a label that indeed has received already in the past the blessing of the European Commission, because it was basically initiated through the European Cluster Excellence Initiative that we have supported. I mean, at least allow sometimes SMEs to know with whom do I dealing. If they have received at least the label, it gives at least an indication that some, let's say, proper management approaches have been followed. That doesn't mean always that cluster organization is excellent. I mean, we have the same in companies, ISO 9000, etc. Many companies get this. It doesn't always mean that this is that they have perfect products, etc. But it at least gives an indication a little bit that, okay, they're looking at different fields of the services that we can provide to the SMEs. So in that respect, we are basically supporting this approach. Now, whether this is something that will also be the criteria for thresholds for future calls, etc. This was discussed very strongly at us. It was proposed at some point. But we found also in the discussion with different member states that some were opposed to that idea, to have it. There was the feeling that it was maybe then just an exclusive club that would be basically closed the European programs to just some. So that was not foreseen. I still believe that it might not harm when external evaluators will look at this, who is part of this. I think this is still a selling argument, but it's for sure not an eligibility criteria that we could not push through the committees. So therefore, you will not find this in the calls. Okay.
If I may add something, we are one of the member states who opposed the idea because we think it's a very valuable initiative, but we don't think it should be compulsory for clusters to go through the process. And we also think that as of now, there's only one company in the European Union providing this service, this label, and we think this should be open to more companies who can also provide the service, and so the service will become more competitive, maybe more accessible. So we think it's important, we think it's valuable, but we don't think it should be compulsory. So we are one of the member states who raised their hand and expressed this view.
Just to respond to this, in the Cluster Excellence Call, this will actually be opened up, so it doesn't mean you need to use this. But if you want to use a Cluster Excellence label, that was basically set up through an NATO grant in the past to also provide, I think in a way, a model to have wider recognition. I think we had for a long time training on cluster management, etc. in the past, and a lot of labels here and there with all costs, etc. You always had this discussion. But I think it didn't become, let's say, recognizable at the European level. And it's only when some member states actually started to using this and promote actually widely that we have in a way now had a success that there are more than 500 cluster organizations in Europe that have used this. I mean, that is at least the advantage of it. We had piecemeal initiative in the past, but we have taken also the, let's say, consideration of the member states into consideration that there was an uneasy feeling that this is maybe one organization, etc. We will actually have a workshop on basically cluster excellence in September, where we also discuss with stakeholders a little bit further of what needs to be changed. Do we need to update the methodology, etc.? So this is also not a static process, and we need to see how we can also give the visibility of that this is still something that is linked to the Commission and our priorities. So we have a keen eye on this.
Okay, good morning. I come from an e-health cluster, and we were wondering regarding this call, which is going to be the duration of the project. Because I mean, in terms of getting to the market for the e-health sector, this involves a long period. So, are we talking about 2 years project, 3 years?
I can't remember. I think it was 3 years. 1 second. I'll just check for you. I don't think it's in there, so apologies. I will come back to this. I believe it was 3 years, but I don't find it now in the. So this is something to be clarified. Thanks for highlighting
Okay, thank
this.
you.
So, okay. No, I can't find it. So sorry. Okay, we'll come back to that. Yeah.
Yes, hello, good morning. Thank you very much, Carsten, for the presentation. My name is Emma Fernandez So the cluster on innovative solutions for independent people. My question goes in line with the labels, but not exactly, since it refers to your comment earlier during your presentation on the fact that you're considering in the Commission to launch a new European cluster strategy for growth, as far as I understood. Would we expect as clusters to have some eligibility criteria in this strategy?
This is a strategy, European strategy. So this is not a program as such, but perhaps at the follow-up of announcing a European strategy, perhaps initiatives will be launched. So this is not about launching an initiative where funding is, but it's about at the European level to outline a new strategy, to explain a bit the new orientation, the challenges and need for actions that need to be taken at policy level, at operational level, and to support companies to boost growth, to foster cross-sectoral linkages, and how we can further advance the development of emerging industries. So it's outlining, in a way, a policy framework of what needs to be done at the European level. And so there is not as such yet any funding involved, but it may give rise to new initiatives, different fields that have not been taken. So instead, I think it's more for you to say and to voice your demands where activities to be taken, always bearing in mind how the European level can support the region and member states in undertaking this, because it's still the role of the region and member states to push cluster policies, but where is the added value that we can bring to the agenda?
So when you mentioned voicing the demand, I presume that there will be a consultation process.
Indeed, as I mentioned, I mean, we'll gather some ideas, for instance, at the European Cluster Conference later in October, and on that basis we intend to plan a public consultation to ask stakeholders what are their views, etc., before then perhaps making the new European cluster strategy available. But that still depends upon the new Commission, whether this is a priority for the Commissioner in our field and of the college as a whole. So that's why I'm only saying at the moment we're considering, but at least in our Director General, this is at the moment, let's say, on the table.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. Simon Vasquez from the Andalusian Aerospace Cluster. I cannot agree more with you and the DG Enterprise and Industry view about the role of SMEs on innovation. But on the other hand, big corporations like Airbus are unfolding a subcontracting policy in which they want to get rid of SMEs, actually. Is it too much to expect that their industrial policy, the big corporations' industrial policy, would align a little bit more with the Commission policy?
I think there's a challenge to better align, indeed, industrial priorities with regional priorities, as well as with SME policy priorities. That aspect will also be, I think, covered as part of the revision of the Small Business Act. But I think more effort needs to be done to link there. And to the particular problem of large enterprises, well, there are some large enterprises that, in a way, indeed organize the value chains themselves, that are not facilitating this, but others are actually very much encouraging and, let's say, an environment near them for new SMEs, etc., to develop new initiatives, instruments, product services that they later also want to integrate. Of course, there's I think, generally a tendency sometimes that we see innovative SMEs to grow, and then they are swallowed by the big lions, let's say in the service industries, the Googles, the Amazons, etc. So, but this is something you cannot necessarily always change the market how it operates. But what you need to look at how you can actually provide a supportive environment to those SMEs in order to stay in their environment and to make them basically opportunity costs to move away. So it's more looking at how you provide them with let's say, with added services in infrastructure that makes them hooked into this ecosystem, basically.
Bueno, pues no veo ninguna pregunta más. Entonces, thank you very much, Carsten, for your presentation.